Hey everybody, welcome to another Sunday live stream. Got a few questions lined up from the pre-chat. We always chat for about an hour before we go live, so if you're hanging out, look for something to do, you can come and chat and ask questions. Some I'll pull aside for kind of the main talk. A lot of times stuff that takes a longer answer. And then a lot of stuff just gets answered kind of rapid fire and quickly between everybody hanging out in chat. So uh, before we went live today, we had about 75 people, kind of a nice fish nerd chat. So I want to follow up on a question that just got asked. Then I've got a few that are written down here. This person had sold 12 teacup platies and 24 fancy guppies at a local fish store on the agreement that they'd get store credit, the equivalent of wholesale market value. And how would you figure that out? So I've actually got a video that's about an hour long on kind of making a business out of selling fish, breeding fish and plants and stuff like that, and that will go a lot more into detail. But the short answer is you can't. And in that video, I explain why. And I was teaching some of my managers at the store, and fish prices vary from vendor to vendor. And so a particular fish, one was 75 cents, one was $2, and then the next vendor was $5.75. It's all the exact same fish, slightly different sizes, and different levels of care and different shipping terms and things like that. But for the most part, unless you have access to a bunch of wholesale lists and know the quality of the fish that would come in and can see are their box charges and shipping charges and all the other things, and know where your local fish store is ordering from, you won't really know what that value is. And so instead, you'll be just relying on whatever value they tell you. Now, I think it's much more important to sell fish to stores at a price that makes sense to you. And kind of the adage of, something's only worth what someone will pay. And so, I personally probably wouldn't take fish into a store for less than $1. At that point, I don't have a way to raise a fish for less than $1, really. You gotta feed them, you gotta clean them, you gotta do all that. And so I wouldn't take less than $1. And I know that you pretty much can't buy most fish for less than $1, with shipping and all of those things. And, you also are gonna have a good idea of how hard it is to raise that fish. And so you might say, hey, it's not worth it for me to raise this fish for less than $3. And that could very well be a true statement. One thing I would say is a guiding principle. I usually expect, or people could expect, about one third of what the fish is selling for in like a store credit or cash scenario, depending on what you've got going on. I go into a lot more details, like this business, depending on how much they're buying from you, they should be, it should be a transaction. And depending on the type of fish store, if it's a real small mom and pop, it's just, yeah, you're basically trading. But as far as the IRS is concerned, that should be documented and reported and all of that, depending on the state and the local laws there. So it could be quite involved. And so maybe they're budgeting that in with, oh, we've got to issue 1099s. The accountant charges X for a 1099. Who knows? But one third is a rough guesstimate, and I don't think you can actually know, and you need to trust them. And a lot of what's going to go on between you and selling to a fish store is going to be a lot of trust anyway. So if it sounds fishy and you don't like the deal, then don't do it. Otherwise, and I think you're good for, you brought in basically 36 fish. If they don't give you pricing that you like, just don't do it again. You can definitely try to do it before you bring fish in. That has another host of questions. How big are they? How good do they look? Is the strain actually the way you described it? So there's still a lot of unknowns there. But in general, I would ask for a range before you bring a fish in and what day and all of that. So, all right. The next question I had was, this person had just started working at the local fish store. They've been listening to live streams and videos for a long time, so it's been helpful. But what do you say to customers that want new fish but have a crazy stock list already? In my opinion, you tell them this is a bad idea and then you sell them every fish in the store. Because if you've done your due diligence and said, hey, you're probably maxed out, or hey, maybe you could fit a couple more, or this fish isn't a good fit for what you have, and they hear that and then they go, cool, bro, I will take 17 rainbow sharks, or whatever they're gonna ask for after you gave them the advice they asked for, or maybe didn't ask for, but you gave them the advice that was in their best interest. If they choose to ignore that, then just take their money. In my experience over the last 15 years being in retail, every time basically that we put our foot down to said absolutely not, they would just go to the competitor and hand them all their money anyway. And then half the time we would deal with the consequences of like, well, what do I do now? Or the worst thing is they buy something even worse. Like, yeah, I wanted 17 rainbow sharks. You guys said no. So I went to this other store and I bought 17 iridescent sharks. And then they grow up to be 8 inches and they're way too big, and the store they bought them from won't take them back. And then you literally show up to work with one day and they're on your doorstep. And then you call animal control and you report them. But, those are all real stories, stuff like that, where, so my advice is take the money. You're going to deal with the consequences at least half the time anyway. And you tried your best. At a certain point, you have to make money for the store. That's just a have to. Otherwise, if you were my employee and you spent all day talking people out of spending money, eventually I just won't be able to afford to have employees. Like at a certain point, you do have to make money, and the goal would be that most of your time is spent talking with customers that have room left in their tank. They're taking your advice. They're doing their own research and have some thoughts, and and we're mostly talking about, I've got 12 neon tetras and I'd like 6 Oscars and I have a 15-gallon tank. It's going to be terrible. We actually document the accounts and everything when those kind of interactions happen. And we also don't sell Oscars, so we go out of our way to make it hard to put just the absolute wrong things together as much as we can. But in an instance where maybe you don't get to do all the fish ordering and you do have a red-tailed catfish and they do have African cichlids, and can those two go together? And my buddy's got it. It's working just fine. I've got a 55-gallon right now, but don't worry. Once my, my income tax comes back, I'm going to buy a 180-gallon, even though you've already explained that's not even close to big enough either. And they said, don't worry about it. I'm almost 22, and then I'm going to buy a 10,000-gallon aquarium. At a certain point, you just go, yep. You it's going to get too big. You know it all. All right, let's go ahead and bag this thing up, collect my $20, and just document that I said didn't recommend it and all of that. So that's the best advice, because otherwise if you stonewall them too bad, then you're getting bad reviews. And as an employee, if you're, let's say your name is Bob, and it's like, yep, Bob was so mean to me, wouldn't sell me the fish, doesn't know what he's talking about. And now your boss and store owner's going, well, what happened here, Bob? Why'd you make this customer so angry? And you explain that, you spent an hour talking the guy out of buying a red-tailed catfish, and that still doesn't look good, because he's going, well, I pay you money and you talked him out and you spent a whole hour on this. And so obviously defer to whatever your manager would tell you to do. But in general, I don't think you can really battle the people that don't want to hear advice. They a lot of times want confirmations. A lot of people think they want advice, but when the answer comes back with, I don't think that would work, all of a sudden they don't really want the advice anymore. So just, be warned for that. What cories are the most likely to sell in mass quantities? I actually go into this in that video too. But in general, Panda Corridoras, Julii Corridoras, Stirbai Corridoras, those 3 are very, 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 very popular. But then you've got things like Albino Corridoras, which are fairly popular because they're cheap. Like we sell them in the store for $3, and they have huge spawns. So you can make a ton of them, and they sell cheap. Whereas like a Panda Corridora, you don't sell as many because they're like twice the price, but also they spawn like 10, 12 at a time. So any update on the new Magic Nano feed? It's in production. I think I'm going to call out a number and say sometime in October If it arrives like next month, great. But I'll give our customer service the extra breathing room, so it's not like Corey said it would be September 4th, and it is September 4th at 6 p.m. Where's the announcement? So, Fishmania, who owns a store in Chattanooga, I think, says either they're going to buy it from you or they're going to buy it from somewhere else. At least you can tell them what will probably happen if they get the fish. That's exactly right. We would love to hear that every store is going to band together and nobody's going to sell that fish and there's never going to be a fish that goes to a wrong home. And that's what fairy tales are made of. Because I started that way. We're like, I'm not going to sell fish that don't go to the right homes. And then you learn real quick, like, oh, cool, you've just bought it anyway from a different store. And now you're back. And what happens is when you spend an hour convincing someone not to buy it, and then they buy it, and then it goes wrong, they come straight back to you and like, yeah, you seem to know a lot about this fish, so I would love to soak up the next 6 hours of your time over the next 2 weeks on this fish. And then you end up going, well, I can't sell you any more fish because it literally is incompatible. So it's a brutal scenario. So at least if you can make the $20, you've got $20 over those next 6 hours as opposed to literally nothing over the next 6 hours. What's the word on the heater? Made no progress towards it at all. I've tested other heaters, which don't pass the test. But yeah, I would say we're still recovering from the move and expansion and all that. A little bit inside baseball, if you will. Summer's super slow season, plus all of the money we've outlaid. We are still like, is that a true statement? Yeah. Here we are, and it's August 18th. We are still not profitable this year. So, like, all the way till here, we're still working on, like, don't worry, employees are getting paid, all that kind of stuff, but there's still bills. Like, we put the $10,000 on the HVAC unit in the expansion, but we owe at least another $10,000 once they complete it. And so at this point, we actually haven't made money profitability-wise, whereas we built lots of infrastructure and that kind of stuff, so that feels good. But what I'm getting to is like switching manufacturers for like lights or heaters or something like that. That's an extra couple $100,000 we just don't have laying around. Whereas we have invested in foods and a few other products, but being that they're not electronics, they're not hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so we can keep, kind of the wheels turning and everything working the way it's supposed to. But if we don't turn actual extra profit, investing into big category type products is pretty difficult to do. I was actually watching another YouTuber in a completely different space talk about that and how they're, I think, $600,000 or $700,000 into what they've been working on, and they are not profitable yet. So, usually at scale and long term and all of that makes sense. So that's why we haven't really worked on. It's not because I just don't want to work on it. It's just because even if I had the solution today, we would have to generate the money to invest into the solution. And that's something that's not talked about a lot, I think, in the YouTube space. When creators do make a product, it's like you might be out several hundreds of thousands of dollars before you can sell your first one for $5. And then you got to sell X to break even. So that's where we are. I've got a green spotted puffer in a brackish tank. The marine tank people tell me I need a pH buffer substrate. Do I? Will snail shells be enough? So snail shells won't really buffer the pH up. They'll buffer like the calcium up a bit. Do you have to have a pH buffer substrate? I would say no. Like here in my fish room, I don't because I already have hard water with high pH. Now, if you're doing brackish water and you're using like a marine salt, usually that'll have a ton of buffer in it anyway. So like if our brine shrimp salt, for example, it's already going to buffer for you. And so if you're doing reasonable water change and maintaining water, you wouldn't have to have crushed coral. Now, that being said, if you were to come to me and say, hey, I'm going to set up a brand new tank for a brackish water species, which substrate should I buy? I was like, yeah, crushed coral makes a lot of sense. But if you already had like, hey, I've got this tank, like let's say the tank behind me was going to go to brackish, would I go out of my way to change out the substrate for crushed coral? No. However, I am going to change the substrate in that tank anyway. If I was setting up brackish, I would use crushed coral, being that I was already going to do that. So depending on where you're at with what I just described is what I would do. And so if your tank's already set up like it sounds, I would not go out of my way to change it, and I would monitor it with marine salt is what I personally would do, unless there's information missing. Maybe you're in that group and they're talking, you're asking them like, oh man, my pH keeps crashing, what should I do? That's a different scenario. So sometimes we don't have all the pieces to the question, but assuming we've got a handle on it, that's how I would do it. All right, this one I wanted to chime in. Question from earlier, and it wasn't a good question to answer in text. It says, I've got sick guppies. I've treated them all with the trio, but they just keep slowly dying. No, now one of them has something pink on it. The water is fine. I'm just not sure what to do anymore. With guppies in particular, live bearers, you can use the trio. And then what does the trio do? The trio treats bacterial infections, parasites on the outside of the body, and internal worms and parasites, right? And so in theory, that would get rid of most. What I find a lot, though, is that people still struggle after that with live bearers because they don't have the proper water structure. And most people have a little bit of a concept on what water structure is, but there is a lot of the hobby where they learn what correct water is. Like, yeah, you just don't want ammonia. You don't want nitrites. You want your nitrates to stay low. And that's kind of where they've cycled their tank, right? And they've learned that, and that's what they know. But what they're not focusing on is like, well, how many minerals in the water? How much pH do you have, right? What is the water temperature? You could have the best water quality in the world and the healthiest guppies in the world, but if they're too cold, they start falling apart. Or way too hot, they start falling apart. Or you have way too much fast filtration, they start falling apart. Also, you could have everything else is checking out just fine, but the pH is 6.5. They're falling apart. Or you can have everything just fine and you have no minerals in the water. They're falling apart. Or you could actually have like pretty good on everything, but these fish were raised in brackish waters, like so many live bears are across the world, and then sold as freshwater. And without having super high mineral content in the water, they fall apart. So now that you've cleaned up your fish with the Med Trio and you're still having problems, what is the answer? The answer for me is usually use some salt. Whether it's going to be marine salt or aquarium salt, it depends on your aquarium. If it's got live plants, I recommend using marine salt. I would start with something like a teaspoon per 10 gallons, roughly. If you don't have live plants and you just want to use aquarium salt or rock salt, I will go a tablespoon per 2 gallons. And that will really fight off any infections, whatever the pink stuff's going on. Whereas like the marine salt approach, that's going to be, let's make them so comfortable that their body fights it off. And so having live plants is going to dictate which two of those methods you can do. And a lot of times you will see a world of difference in your live bears and sometimes all your fish just by using a little bit of marine salt or minerals. You can also accomplish this with like Equilibrium and Wonder Shells and some other products. But I find that the fastest, easiest method is marine salt, whether it's something like our brine shrimp salt or somebody else's salt. You get nearly instant gratification. We see improvements in fish within 24 hours. And so that's where I would go with that. After knowing a lot more, testing your water, checking the checklist, going, yep, I got 7.3 pH, I got moderate hardness, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this, I've got this. My water temperature is good. Yeah, that's where I'd be focusing. If you've had your Nubius rot in your aquarium, how long till you can reintroduce, or is it possible to reintroduce? Yeah, in general, I find that Anubias rot doesn't spread that much. I've definitely had aquariums where you bring a new Anubias, that Anubias doesn't do well, and the old ones are just doing fine. I've heard horror stories of like, I got one Anubias rot and it took out my whole tank, and I haven't witnessed that. Doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but in my tanks, I haven't witnessed that. So I would say, reasonably, almost like everything, really. I would take out the offenders. Okay, they melted back and died. That's not good. I would then really double check your water. So many times people stuff like I would say half the time if you're to play customer service, they'll be like, my lawn is on fire. And it'll turn out that it's not a product or anything you've sold them. It's like, yeah, someone set it on fire. And that's what happens in the aquarium of like, the only thing that has changed is that I bought this Aquariumcoop shot glass. And you'll be like, yeah, except your water changes by the minute. Like your aquarium is changing every minute. So usually when people are steadfast, you're the only thing I've changed, it's usually kind of a flag of like, you don't understand that your aquarium is always changing. So it'd be like if I got, let's knock on wood, but if I got diagnosed with cancer tomorrow and be like, the only thing I've changed, I went to the farmer's market today and I had a, like this puff pastry sausage thing. And I'd be like, yep, that's what gave me cancer. It's the only thing I've changed. And the reality is like, my body's changing every day. Things are happening every day. And so that's what I would focus on with almost everything is like, take a look at the water and the environment you've created and actually ask yourself, have I been doing a good job? And what I know is the answer is always no, because you've got fish from all around the world and plants from all around the world and you're trying to make them all happy. That's really hard to do. And so when you have one specific thing, this fish or that plant or this thing that isn't happy, if you research, you Google it and go, what really makes them happy? And then you start doing some of those things, usually they will get happier. Now, in extreme cases, some other stuff might get unhappy, but usually what I find is the thing that's not happy, you start working to make it happy, it does become happy, and then everything is kind of just doing better. And a lot of times, by making the one thing happy, it makes other things happy. And so that's what I work on a lot. And so I'm going, what plants am I going to use? My 800 gallon. I'm looking, do I go dwarf Sagittaria? Do I go Vallisneria? Do I go swords? And I start looking at wild caught water parameters, and different types of val come from all around types of world. And I go, well, I've got the hard water. It did really well in my 40 gallon. The dwarf Sagittaria is doing really well. Okay, I'll probably use one of those two. And I'm also, lots of root tabs. And I'm trying to get myself set up for best success, knowing, here's why. It's not can I or can't I grow that plant? The answer is yes, I can grow that plant. I know that I'm going to put it through hell. I'm going to let clown loaches beat on those plants every day of their lives. And so I want a plant that starts out loving life, and then once I apply the clown loaches to it, hopefully they're still doing well enough that they will continue to thrive and push forward. Where if I take a plant and I put it in there that I already know they don't like it really, and then I let them get beat on by the plants, a lot of times what we'll see is that they just peter out. And so the more you focus on that, the more you will have success. And it's a difficult thing to make all the things happy all the time. And so, especially if we're not monitoring for all the things, or we've got stuff coming up in life, like, oh, I switched my job at work, or it's Christmas time, or you just got a new kid or dog, or some life event, it's real easy to have stuff kind of like it was working, and it's like not really working as much as it was. Best advice for reducing high nitrates: short term, change water. Long term, live plants or reduce the fish or feed cleaner foods. So like this tank behind me, I'm going to feed it because I remembered I almost fed it earlier today because I fed all the other fish before I went live. And I was like, oh, I'll feed these guys live. I'm going to feed them freeze-dried bloodworms that will be coming out like in October. But that doesn't have any fillers. And so usually with less fillers, you can feed less. And that means less nitrogen at the output. So let me go ahead and get that going. You guys will get to see them go crazy once I stop moving. They are still skittish. You can see they're moving around there. Let's see here. What month or year does the expansion open for the retail store? We're hoping this year. Uh, we don't have an exact timeline, but the hope is honestly September, October time. That would be ideal, but we can only move as fast as the local government allows. So we're we're stuck there. I have pictures and I've been taking pictures. The store is looking pretty darn good, honestly. It's just gotta wait for those checks. Get to the last things checked off. So yeah, if you didn't know, clown loaches sound really cool and will eat off the top like that. And I find it to be super fun when you feed floating food. So even though they'll eat frozen bloodworms, you can see the eel right there. They'll eat frozen bloodworms and everything. The bloodworms melt and go to the bottom, and you don't get that cool thing. Yeah, even just moving my arm will sometimes make them just. But yeah, I love a big group of clown loaches. Mostly any fish that'll kind of, I'll call it frenzy feed like that. How would I plumb a drilled tank with 4 holes? It's got 2 returns and 2 feeding lines to the sump. But the feeds, it says done. I'm going to say don't. The feeds don't have a box directly behind the tank like a true Herbie style would. That my brain is like got to process that. So there's 4 holes, 2 incoming, 2 outgoing. Let me think. 2 in. Yeah, this is too much without being in person to draw you a diagram. But I personally would use all 4 holes that you have to be drains to the sump. I would set, since you know what a Herbie is, I would use one of them as a Herbie style, which means it has a constant siphon. I would use the other 3 as backups. So your Herbie will be the lowest one in the water, and you will use a gate valve to choke that down so the water level rises to the next highest one just barely. And then I would come up over the top with some black PVC and build yourself a really nice return line and maybe even a spray bar or something like that. You could use one of them as a return. I don't know how exactly they're laid out, but that's what I would do. I would get at least 3 going down, and then yeah. But it all depends. Sometimes you've got holes that are drilled in the bottom and in the back. I might be sealing some off. I don't know. Without being in person and kind of drawing where they live in, what's going on. Here's what I would do. And because these types of conversations, what happens in person is you go, well, I can do that, but I got a canopy in the way, or this is a problem, or that's going to be a problem. And so advice like this makes it pretty darn hard to get you where you want to go on the first attempt. Now that I've had blueberry snails for a few months, have you noticed any additional care requirements other than standard snails? Yeah, they pretty much only want to feed on, I'm going to call it just like fish tank gunk. So algae and mulm and that kind of stuff. I've yet to really ever see them eat food. Like, here's snail food, or here's an algae wafer, or here's this. They pretty much never want to go after that. So that makes them a little different in my opinion. Where most snails are scavengers, these are as well, but won't touch protein, it seems. Like, that's kind of odd. Who makes a good metal rack that won't bend? Not looking for cheap from Home Depot, but something more industrial. I want to stack 9 20-gallon tanks. I think you would have to go with either A, something custom, if you got something local, or B, look into pallet racking. And you're going to have to go to pallet racking type places. Both the stuff that Dean's using, stuff I have at the warehouse, all pallet racking. It is built with much crazier heavy gauges of steel. They also cost more money, and they typically come in bright orange, ugly colors, but you could paint that. Those ones in general will not, you won't have problems with. And from what we've found, I can get them all the way, I think, down to like 2 feet front to back. Typically, I'll go with the 30-inch one, so that way I can have the plumbing contained and everything as well, but just depends on what you're really trying to do there. But yeah, that's what I would do. Blueberry snails, new to the hobby, they are. Chris Lukup discovered them, I want to say like less than a year ago. So yeah, they are new. How's Elmer? Fat and sassy. Yeah, he is at the retail store. I just haven't done any videos of retail. I've been working so much down there, and just getting stuff ready and training and doing all of that by the time where I'm done, it's like 9 p.m. I'm like, do I want to start filming a video now? Like, really? So, that's a good point. Someone's pointing out that Glitch on YouTube says only 4+ years on Candy and Thomas. I wonder if they've actually fulfilled the member thing. And what I mean by that is, for the longest time, when we were coming up on 5 years, I was like, hey, you guys need to put in a 5-year like emoji or like member badge. And they're like, yeah, we'll think about it, because we beta tested this, so we are ahead of like most other creators on the platform, and most other creators outside of gaming have not had that much success. So I'm gonna actually check if they have new ones we can put up, because that would solve you guys' issue right away. Let me see here. Looking at memberships, can we actually do? I can create up to 6 pricing levels. I could charge you guys more money. Those seem to be the priorities when other creators and the execs are talking like ways to make more money, and where I like to focus on some of the basics of like, well, can we focus on, let's see here, that's okay. They literally have a 60-month option now finally, but unfortunately they do not have one for 72 months. So the 6-year thing is non-existent. So I will get our graphic designer Lizzie. I'll be like, hey, we're gonna need one for the 60-month thing, and then I'll send another email to YouTube going, cool, you got to 60 months. Where's where's the 72-month one? And they'll probably be like, well, there's only 4 channels on the platform that even have people at 72 months. And then it'll roll out in 9 more months from now or something, and I'll try to remember. That's good though. We can at least add one more. I like that. So that'll be a new fun thing to add. At least some people will get a new one, and maybe I'll do a whole new scheme or something. We'll talk about it. I got a marketing meeting tomorrow, and I'll bring that up and see if we want to devise something new or just change it. Let's see here. By the way, you'll see a video coming out, but I've got a bunch of the let me find one here. I've got a bunch of the new flue ball filters, all the ACs. I've been testing them, and I've been watching lots of people do videos on them. In my opinion, some videos are pretty good, but no one has done this whole thing justice. People are missing lots of the changes. The aqua clears all the way up to the 70 and below are very similar. The AC 110 is a completely different thing. And so I've been testing them. I got some over there, and eventually I think I'll be doing a video and showing the changes. And I think the TLDR of the whole thing, the Aqua Clear new series overall, I believe, is better than the old series, with there still being some improvements, I think, that can be done, which I will always follow that up with, just like all of my products. There is always like, yep, now that I've used it for a while, I'd change that. I'd do that a little bit different. And so I'm trying to put them through the paces before I do a video and actually go, hey, here's what's going on, instead of, I think this is what will go on. And then maybe long term, if I'm still running them, I will do a much longer update type video on those. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. I've got all kinds of parts and manuals and things around my desk because I've been working on that for the last kind of couple days, just Yeah, you can see here. One cool feature I will say right off the bat is they do have longer warranties. And then if you do the thing that I hate, Fluwell, if you're listening, I hate this. If you scan the code and like sign your life over and let them spam the crap out of you, they'll give you 2 more years. So I hate that system. If you're gonna warranty a product, just warranty it instead of, well, you got to jump through all the hoops and I'll give you another 2 years. So technically, if you jump through all the hoops, the new Aquaclears are warranted for 5 years. That's awesome. Shouldn't have to jump through extra hoops. I don't like that part, but I guess it's better than not getting the extra years. And so, yeah, you get the original Aquaclears had 2 years. Now they come with 3 years, and if you register it, you get 5 years. So, yeah, that's there's definitely improvements. I will say if you're buying an Aquaclear filter, you wouldn't go wrong with buying a new one. There will be some old guys like me who like to yell at clouds that might like some of the old features of like, oh, I actually did like that little part a little bit better. So no matter what Aquaclear you buy right now, I still believe it's better than a tidal filter, and that's the internet almost unanimously disagrees with me on that, but that's fine. We don't all have to agree on everything. What, Fluwell's not tripping? Oh no, they're tripping. Let's make no mistake that they're still tripping. They didn't consult me, which I think that is a mistake on their part. And there's still things where you're like, oh yeah? Like for instance, where is it at? Oh yeah, here's a part for you. They still have this little doodad that sucks. This part that after you've been using it for a little while gets loose enough that if you even like, you could be sitting on your couch right now